Hello guys, hope you're well. This is Mr. Stone. So today we're going to go through the ancient Greek influences topic, the first unit in philosophy in the OCR syllabus. So make sure you've got some paper in front of you, so make some notes, pause the video whenever you like. We're going to go through the ancient Greek influences. Before we get into the key characters, there's some keywords which we need to make sure that we know because they're going to crop up in this unit. And they're going to be part of the evaluation of this unit and the influence of these thinkers across kind of the rest of philosophy. So metaphysics. Metaphysics is something that ancient Greek philosophers were really interested in. It's the study of anything that's kind of non-physical, anything that looks at the nature of reality, anything that looks at the idea of what can be real, what's not real, questions such as God, space, time, the nature of change. Meta is another word for kind of outside or outer, so out of the world of physics, the material world, those kinds of bigger questions. Ontology, this looks at the nature of being and existence, what it means for something to exist, the kind of fundamental nature of something closely related to metaphysics. And then epistemology, the philosophical field concerned with what we know, the nature of knowledge, knowledge itself, and then how do we know things? And how do we know that we know things? How do we know 2 + 2 is 4? How do we know leaves on trees are green, for instance? Different types of knowledge. So Plato is very much interested in epistemology. So before we get on to the two key figures in ancient Greek influences, Plato and Aristotle, we need to look at some pre-Socratic thinkers or other ancient Greek thinkers, otherwise known as pre-Socratic thinkers. So we have Homer, who goes back to the 8th century. He's very famous for writing the Iliad and the Odyssey. We have Pythagoras, a mathematician, philosopher. I'm sure you've heard of him in maths. Thought that nature was constructed of atoms. We have Heraclitus, slightly more recent than Pythagoras. He, again, a Greek philosopher, famous for saying that you can never step in the same river twice, famous for saying that the world, nature, everything is in a constant state of change, otherwise known as universal flux or impermanence, kind of an idea borrowed from Buddhism. And we're going to come back to this idea because Plato was quite concerned with this idea, this notion of reality, and he thought about that. And then we have another philosopher called Democritus. He kind of took Pythagoras' ideas further and developed a theory of atoms, atomic theory, that everything is made up of indivisible atoms and there lies space between these things. It kind of like the idea that nature is made of Lego bricks. Everything is made of just kind of very simple things that can't be broken down. Which was rather interesting considering he came up with this almost 2,500 years ago, and science is only now just beginning to understand what he meant and actually to kind of develop his thinking further. Anyway, they're all known as pre-Socratic thinkers because they come before the first of these three main ancient Greek philosophers. And the first one is Socrates. Now, it's important to have a little bit of a knowledge of Socrates in order to explain Plato and Aristotle in a bit more detail. You won't get a question on Socrates, but it adds to the context of particularly Plato. So Socrates lived before Plato. Plato was a good friend of Socrates and a student of Socrates. Socrates was a philosopher. He liked to go around Athens, kind of asking questions, debating with people, engaging with critical thinking. He came up with the idea of the Socratic method, which is a philosophical idea of using questions to get to the root or the core of a belief. So to continuously ask questions, to dig deeper. And this method, this kind of habit of behavior which he developed, got him into trouble with the people of Athens. With the leaders of Athens who promoted their kind of pantheon, their belief in the Greek gods and goddesses, and that these systems of beliefs should not be challenged. Socrates was very good at challenging these beliefs and asking questions and throwing doubt on the kind of traditional beliefs of the time in Athens, and not just the belief in the gods, but the kind of authority of the government, the way they were pushing their politics. He was interested in critical thinking and getting to the root of things, and trying to find the truth to an answer, which didn't go down very well. And the apparent cause, or the apparent kind of crime of corrupting the minds of the young and almost pushing for disbelief in God, agnosticism or atheism, he was put to death. He was forced to drink his own poison. And Plato was there, and many of his other followers were there as he drank from the cup and died. Kind of his story features quite heavily in Plato's writings. Socrates was somebody who never wrote anything down. So although he was a key philosopher, quite unique in the sense that he wrote anything down. The reason why, he said, I know that I know nothing. And so he felt kind of inferior. He felt he wasn't able to write anything down. Anyway, coming to Plato, because Socrates features quite heavily in Plato's writing. So there's a bit of detail about Plato, 428 to 348 BC. His key work is known as the Republic, although he wrote many other books, which were in the form of dialogues between a couple of key characters, sometimes Socrates, sometimes others. So Plato then, his view of the world. The key thing about ancient Greek philosophers, including the pre-Socratic ones, was that they tried to come up with a kind of grand universal theory, a unifying theory of everything. They wanted to try and get an idea, a concept, a theory which would make sense of everything in the world, including its origin, its current state of affairs, its future, the place of human beings, the place of a god or gods, or the immaterial world. That's what they tried to do. So when we look at Plato, when we look at Aristotle, we're coming to it with that mindset that they are trying to explain everything in their view, which is quite significant and quite unique, because many other philosophers don't try and do that. They might zoom in on one thing or have various views that may seem to kind of contradict each other, but Plato and Aristotle and other ancient Greek philosophers were trying to get to the bottom of a grand unifying theory. So as part of Plato's view then, he was a dualist, which meant he believed in this distinction between the body and the soul. He believed the soul was immortal. He believed the soul belongs to the realm of the forms, and its inputs into the body before or during pregnancy, placed into the material world, into the physical world. And the soul has kind of vague recollections of the true world of the forms from its existence before childhood, before personhood. And this is the reason why young children can have basic knowledge of concepts such as truth and beauty and justice without ever being taught them. So he was fundamentally a dualist. He believed in an immortal soul. So Plato's concept of forms and things, this is his key kind of overarching theory, and then we'll get into some analogies which Plato uses to help us understand what he's trying to say. So we have the realm of the forms. This is the universal, immaterial, spiritual realm. Plato divided reality into two realms, the realm of the forms and the realm of the material world, the realm of the things, or the material realm. And within each realm, there's a hierarchy. And so forms, in the realm of the forms, we have eternal forms of certain things. Actually, Plato said eternal forms of everything. But he kind of zooms in and talks about a couple of things in particular. And these forms, they are transcendent, they are eternal, they are immaterial, they are non-physical, and they influence everything in the realm of the things, in the material realm. And the material realm is more of a shadow of the realm of the forms. The realm of the forms is the perfect version of these things. And the four that are really, really important are the form of the good, which is the top of his hierarchy, and then form of beauty, truth, and justice. And then in the realm of the things, the material realm, we have things that are temporal, that are spatio, that are changeable, that are to do with our senses, that are copied, that are imperfect, that are corrupted, that decay, that die. And we have reflections of the forms of themselves. So we might have inanimate objects which kind of reflect the perfect version, such as the form of a chair or form of a table. We have perhaps more political things like rights or constitutions, which are a reflection of the perfect form of justice, etc. We have artwork, we have philosophy, we have reason, which are reflections of the perfect forms of maybe the good or justice or beauty or truth. So he separates things. He's a dualist. He separates the reality into two realms. And in the realm of the forms, like I said, there's a hierarchy. The form of the good is at the top. The form of the good illuminates everything else. It is part of everything else. It has its place at the top, but it illuminates all the other forms. And without the form of the good, we would have no knowledge of anything. And the ultimate goal of philosophy is to gain true knowledge of that form of the good. That is the ultimate goal of philosophy. The ultimate goal of human beings, in a way. And underneath that, we have beauty, truth, and justice. And underneath that, we have concepts and ideas. Then we have living objects, and then we have inanimate objects. That is the perfect form of these things. But the key ideas are at the top. Form of the good, beauty, truth, and justice. So Plato has three analogies to help us try and understand what he's getting at here when he talks about the form of the good and the material realm. So he has the analogy of the divided line, which is basically a table, a grid like this, with natural things on the left-hand side, then a line that divides it, and then the good, or the kind of form of those things, that we enter into the world of the mind and thought and reason and rational thinking. And Plato was a rationalist. I didn't really say that at the start, but Plato was a rationalist in the sense that he thought the reason for his concept of reality was based on reason, not on what we can see, what we can experience, but on reason, on our minds being the ultimate source of knowledge. Coming back to epistemology again. So on the left-hand side, the opinion side, the lesser important side, the lesser knowledge side, we have the sun, the world of sight, things seen, we have images, we have objects, we have conjecture, belief, and opinion. Those things that kind of exist in the material world, in the realm of opinion, perhaps, not so much in the realm of philosophy. Then we have things on the right-hand side which exist in the mind in terms of understanding and reason and rational thinking. And we get all the way up to the highest form for Plato's mind, which is the ideals. Perfect form of beauty, perfect form of justice and goodness. And these exist in the mind and in the realm of the forms. And these are the things which we should strive for, which we should aim towards, and which are the highest at the top of his hierarchy in terms of everything. Everything there is a reality. This is at the top. So then we have the analogy of the sun, which really helps to explain the form of the good. So just like the sun illuminates things, just like you need the sun to actually see an object, just like our eyes rely on the sun to illuminate objects, we need the form of the good to illuminate knowledge, to illuminate truth. Everything is understood in the light of the form of the good. And the ultimate aim of philosophy, ultimate aim of human beings, is to return to the form of the good, is to get to know the truth of the form of the good, and then to live that out, to reflect that in our ethics. And that kind of brings ethics into his unifying universal theory of everything. So it's not just philosophy, it's not just a theory of reality, it's ethics as well. It's how we should behave. And the knowledge of the form of the good enables the philosopher to seek out the good in all situations, to be morally good, to be virtuous, to have good actions. etc. And then we come to Plato's most famous analogy, which is the cave analogy. The cave analogy. So we have various elements of the cave analogy. We have the prisoners who are chained against the wall, and all they can see are these shadows dancing on the wall in front of them, these shadows of shapes that are moving around. And behind the wall, on the other side of the wall, we have the puppet masters who are holding up the symbols which are forming the shadows on the wall, and we have the fire that reflects, that creates the shadows on the wall of these symbols. And then at the top of the cave we have the outside world, And the idea is that the prisoners don't know the rest of kind of existence. All they can see to start with is the shadows on the wall, and they believe that that is reality. That what they can see is reality, and they believe that that is kind of the total sum of existence. And the story goes in the cave analogy that one of the prisoners breaks free. He's able to loose his chains. He's able to free himself from that row that he's chained to, and then he kind of makes his way out of the cave. He sees the puppet masters. He sees the shapes that are forming the shadows on the wall. He sees the fire, and then he's able to make his way out of the cave up into reality, up into the outside world. And then he sees kind of the truth of things. He sees the real sun, the real clouds, the real nature. The only things of which he'd seen before were shadows of those things silhouetted on the wall. And now he sees kind of the truth of those things. He sees the real version of those things, and he's overwhelmed. He's enlightened. You might use that word, enlightened. Perhaps you might say he has some kind of religious experience. And then he decides that actually he can't just live with this on his own. He's so kind of encouraged and overwhelmed by this experience that he wants to go and tell the other prisoners that, you know, there is more to life than what they can see on the wall. That those things are merely shadows of the true reality. And so he goes back down in the cave. He makes it to the prisoners and tries to convince them that, you know, there is more to life than just the shadows. These things are just shadows on the wall. They are not truth. And the other prisoners, instead of perhaps believing the freed prisoner, they're incensed. They get very angry. How dare he kind of question their version of reality? How dare he say that they're wrong? You know, this guy is a lunatic. And eventually they kill him. They get so incensed that they kill him. And that's where kind of the analogy kind of ends. And you might be able to see perhaps reflections of maybe Socrates' story or kind of some of his other ideas in here. But what we can see is some of kind of Plato's views on reality. You know, that the realm of things, the material realm, is the bit in the cave, is what the prisoners can see, the shadows that they can see silhouetted on the wall, dancing around. That's the material realm that we live in, kind of just a shadow, a reflection of the perfect form. And we are being held kind of captive by our material bodies, which are limited, which are corrupted. And everything around us is kind of showing us mere reflections, mere shadows of imperfection. Everything around us is like a puppet master, claiming to be the true reality of things when actually it's not. It's a material imperfection. It's a poor reflection. And then when he breaks free, when he's able to escape to the outside worlds, that's when he gets himself into the realm of the forms. That's when he realizes, you know, there is a realm of the forms. There isn't, a dualism to reality. And he starts to experience the realm of the truth, the perfect form of truth, the perfect form of justice, and ultimately the perfect form of good as he kind of encounters the sun for the first time, and he's blinded by it, and his eyes have to adjust. He encounters that for the first time, and then and that's when then he kind of goes back to try and explain to the rest of the prisoners that actually there is more to reality than just the realm the material things which they live in and which we live in. So kind of this kind of quote sums up some of Plato's thinking, that there will be no end to the troubles of states, government, society, politics, or even humanity in itself, till philosophers become kings in this world, or till those we now call kings and rulers really and truly become philosophers. So the idea that, that philosophers, people who have enlightened themselves with the form of the good, that are striving for the form of the good, for the perfect form of truth and justice and beauty, and who realize that the current world we live in is corrupted and decayed and imperfect. When those people kind of free themselves of selfish thinking, aim for philosophy, aim for the ultimate truth of things, when those people become kings or rulers in our world, then then there'll be kind of societal peace, because the right people will be in charge, the people who are not seeking power for themselves, the people who understand the greater knowledge of reality. Interesting ideas. And then this one as well, another quote from Plato that perhaps sums up a different aspect of his philosophy. But people do bad deeds when they do not use their reason and let themselves be carried away by their emotions. So this is kind of his link between philosophy and ethics, that people's philosophy, what they strive for, what they reason, how much they use their reason, how much they use their rational thinking, how much they try and engage with the forms, with their kind of deeper rational thinking, that then would carry over into the way they act and the way they treat others. Whereas people who don't use their rational thinking, who don't engage in philosophy, engage in philosophical thought, engage in that striving for enlightenment or the form of the good or beauty or truth or justice or those higher ideals, people who kind of simply just use emotions and use opinions and use those things which just kind of only exist in the material world, just like that analogy of the divided line, and those people will end up doing bad things, and they will get carried away by their emotions, and they will not be virtuous, ethical people. So again, quite an interesting idea there. But that link between philosophy and ethics in Plato's kind of universal unifying theory. So strengths of Plato's view then, strengths of Plato's view of everything, his dualistic approach to reality, realm of the forms, realm of the material world, realm of appearances, the form of the good, etc., the analogies, all of that kind of the strengths of that. What's good about thinking that reality is in this way, or at least some of the strengths of the way Plato tries to explain it? Well, in the analogy of the cave, we see a reference to Socrates. So we see Plato trying to wrestle with a way to explain Socrates' unfair and unjust death. And actually that might be quite a good thing, because Socrates is not the only person who's died in such a way. Christians would look at the person of Jesus and other Christian martyrs. Other people might look at perhaps Martin Luther King or Gandhi, who were assassinated for supposedly doing the right thing, for striving for the ideals of justice and beauty in society and fairness in society, and those people were unfairly and unjustly killed by people who didn't kind of believe in them, or so incensed by their view of equality or view of the world. And so maybe using Plato's ideas actually explains that, actually explains why these things happen to such kind of good people. Maybe as well, his cave analogy is a reflection or perhaps an explanation of the modern day experience that we might feel as we engage with the media. We feel that the media might be trying to control us and show us just these pictures on the wall and say that's reality. Maybe the media is the puppet masters, or the government, or are the puppet masters in the cave, and we are the prisoners, and all we are seeing is the images on the wall which they are putting in front of us. And perhaps having that enlightened experience, realizing there is perhaps more to reality than just the same old stories that we are told or we are put in front of us, that there's more than one way to think, perhaps, than just the way we are told to think by the news or by media, etc. Maybe as well, this idea of kind of being philosophically enlightened is quite similar to other perhaps religious ideas. Buddhism, enlightenment, to be free from the world of suffering and attachment. In Christianity, we get this. Jesus talks about the idea of the kingdom of God. This idea that there is another realm, there is another world, there is a spiritual realm, an immaterial part to reality. Other Christians might talk about heaven being that as well. Ultimately, the full experience of that other world. So maybe within Plato's view, there is other religious ideas or explanations which kind of back him up to say actually there is a reason why we should take Plato's view seriously. And within that as well, there's this underlying notion that we all have a universal fundamental search for truth, for beauty, justice and goodness. We all want it. It's something that society craves. And whether we ultimately agree with Plato's definition, although he's a bit loose with those things, it's something that perhaps we all strive for, we all want as a collective society. Another strength is that Plato's views directly impact ethics. Again, as well with philosopher King's ideas that those people that strive perhaps do maybe think more for others than themselves. In terms of modern thinkers, Plato doesn't really have many on his side, but he does have one, and that's a philosopher called Iris Murdoch, 20th century philosopher who supported Plato's ideas on the form of the good. Supported Plato's views on searching for some kind of universal definition, quest for goodness, and that we should do that, and that it should impact our ethics. And then finally, as a hark back to the pre-Socratic thinkers, maybe Plato's view that there is a perfect realm and that we are simply living in an imperfect shadow of those things provides an answer to Heraclitus' concept of eternal impermanence, that we are kind of living in this world that it's eternally changing, constant state of flux, can never step in the same river twice, because we're in this material world. We're in the form of the appearances. Objections then. Objections. There are many objections to Plato's theories. So some of them come from Aristotle, some of them come from other thinkers and philosophers. Aristotle was Plato's student, studied with Plato for 20 years, and then formed his own school and his own way of thinking, which was very different, almost opposite to Plato. So Aristotle said couple of objections: that Plato's assumptions that things need to be eternal, to be pure, not always the case. Basically, Aristotle kind of questioned some of Plato's assumptions are in the realm of the forms. He said if forms were so essential, why do we not study them? Why do we study perhaps the more material, more practical, logistical aspects of certain things? Why do we not study the perfect form of science or the perfect form of medicine, rather than teaching doctors the practical skills, the perfect form of health? And forms in and of themselves, although whether they exist in the realm of the forms or not, in and of themselves, they have no practical value for life on earth. Plato doesn't really explain their kind of practical value. He says that it would lead to you being a virtuous person, but he doesn't really say why. And apart from maybe the certain things which we've looked at, which Plato argues that there is a universal definition to goodness and beauty and truth and justice, although he doesn't give it, he does argue that there is one. Many other things like number, like animals, perhaps it's hard to argue that they have a form, a perfect form. It seems a bit absurd to say that number has a perfect form when number isn't of itself a rational thing which is eternal, which can go on forever, and has no kind of logic behind that thought. Other critiques. The biggest one, obviously, is that Plato just assumes that these things exist, assumes that there is a realm of appearances, assumes that we are in a mere shadow of the realm of the forms, no justification. no validation. Like I said, he was a pure rationalist. And on the other hand, Aristotle was an empiricist. And many other philosophers that we look at, they are empiricists. They take their knowledge of the world from what they can see and observe and investigate, rather than perhaps what their mind can come up with. And apart from this idea of recollection, that young children kind of have in themselves this idea of goodness and beauty and truth and fairness and justice, there is no real other empirical evidence to say the realm of the forms exist. Just like if you know, that critique of Christianity to say, well, where's the evidence of heaven? Where's the evidence of hell? Where's the evidence of an enlightened spirit or an enlightened soul in Buddhism? Where's the evidence of the kingdom of God as some kind of tangible thing? You know, there's no empirical evidence to these things. Karl Popper, who we come across in the religious language topic in year 2 philosophy, argue that Plato was determined to find a certainty in a world where certainty cannot be found. Perhaps it was this fear of change. Perhaps it was just an underlying sense that the world was constantly changing, and he wanted some kind of reality, some kind of permanence to hold on to. And that maybe led him to the forms and his conclusion. And then A.J. Ayer, who we also come across in religious language, we know he's a philosopher of language. He argues that Plato assumes that because the nouns exist, because we can describe things like love, good, and justice, and they exist as adjectives as well, describe things as loving or as good, various degrees of goodness, or that's a good action, well done. Doesn't necessarily mean there must be a kind of a universal definition, or indeed a perfect form of them. That's a jump in his assumptions there. So that's a bit of Plato. Plato's knowledge of reality, his version of reality, his explanation of reality, and strengths and weaknesses. So now let's come to Aristotle. Again, some information about Aristotle. There, Aristotle was Plato's student for 20 years. Then he formed his own school and his own way of thinking, and he wrote a lot as well. Plato and Aristotle both wrote extensively. Aristotle was born into a very rich family. His father was the doctor to the king of Macedonia, and a very famous Macedonian man who was a student of Aristotle called Alexander went and conquered, a large section of the known world, also known as Alexander the Great, king of Macedonia at the time. He was also Aristotle's student. So Aristotle has famous students, just like Plato. So he founded a very different school to Plato. Plato's school was called the Academy, which is Plato's way of thinking, although perhaps it has no empirical evidence. His version of school, or higher education, is quite similar to the way we do things, in terms of placing a strong emphasis on rational thinking, on subjects like English and maths. Rather different to Aristotle's, which was very peripatetic, very outdoors, very experiential. So he was fascinated also with the why question. Why do things come into existence? Why are humans the way they are? Why is the world the way it is? Again, he was looking for a universal, unifying theory of everything, but he did not believe in two separate realms like Plato. He was an empiricist. He believed we can come to true knowledge of things through our sense experience. He believed in the importance of thinking and learning. And he's known as the father of modern day science. He really delved into biology. He was, known as the father of science. He came up with the words such as per genus and per differentia, classifying things by type and by difference. kind of a side note to where we're going with this. But Aristotle's key terms then. So he borrows some of the same key terms as Plato, but it's important we know the difference because Aristotle uses them rather differently. So for Aristotle, the form exists within the object itself. So Plato believed the form of an object existed in the realm of the forms as a immaterial, perfect kind of floating spiritual reality somewhere up there or out there. But for Aristotle, that realm doesn't exist. The form of an object exists within itself, its structure and characteristics. And the substance, for Aristotle, the substance of something is the material from which it's made. And the prime matter, prime matter, is kind of the basics of what that substance is made of. Okay. Thing without some kind of structure or form. Form being the key word there. Come back to that one later. So, other key terms then. Other key terms. Aristotle places a key emphasis on the words potentiality and actuality. So, potentiality is any possibility that a thing can be said to have. Something that it might be able to achieve given the right conditions in the future, that it might turn into, such as an acorn has the potentiality to turn into an oak tree. Given the right conditions, the right amount of time, and nothing stopping it, it will turn into an oak tree. And then actuality, the kind of the capacity of an object to be in that state, to be in a more complicated state, where what it's kind of actually doing. So he agreed with Heraclitus that everything is a constant state of flux, moving from potentiality to actuality. So moving from one state to another complicated state, which then, by definition of the creature or the object, moves into a slightly more complicated state. So although an acorn turns into an oak tree, it doesn't stay as like a static oak tree. It changes into perhaps a larger oak tree. It sheds its leaves. It creates more oak trees. It spreads its roots and perhaps joins in the community of the rainforest or the forest, with its roots and the other trees, etc. So when it comes to humans, for Aristotle, and this is kind of a side note, but it's important again to know that his overarching theory links with ethics. For Aristotle, a flourishing human life, Aristotle uses the word flourishing, it's one which virtuously achieves its full potentiality. So Aristotle links philosophy, links the human search for a flourishing life with the idea of being virtuous, being ethically virtuous, ethically good, morally good, honest and truthful and fair. So he kind of said again that to be a virtuous human being is the kind of the top aim of the life of a human, the full actuality of a human being. So as part of this explanation for why, in Aristotle's mind, everything is a constant state of flux, Aristotle agreed with Heraclitus, as did Plato, but Aristotle explains it that everything is in a constant state of flux because everything is constantly changing. And the reason why is that these causes are constantly coming into effect. So there are causes and there are effects, and there is a chain of cause and effect, and we can kind of trace 4 causes and effects in almost everything. So you've got the material cause, the matter, the substance from which an object is made. So if you take a table, for instance, the material cause of a table is wood. We have the formal cause, the form, the structure, the shape of the table, the shape of a chair, the shape of a house, the shape of a cow, etc. We have the efficient cause, the builder, the maker, the outside force, the external force. Or maybe in the case of an animal or a human being, the parents that cause a child or a baby animal to come into existence. And then number 4, the final cause, and this is another way of saying the purpose, the telos, a word that comes up quite a lot in philosophy, the telos of the object, or the telos of the animal or the thing itself. And that becomes easy to say for like an inanimate object like a table or a chair. The purpose of that is to sit at or work at, or be structurally sound, be used for studying, be used for eating, be used for outdoors, etc. Purpose of a car is to be driven around, etc. When it comes to animals, and in fact humans, the purpose of those things becomes a bit more controversial. You know, as Aristotle said, the purpose of a human being is to fulfill its potentiality, to be virtuous, to live a virtuous life, to strive for those things of fairness and goodness and quality and knowledge as well, knowledge of the world. But again, that's a relative idea. You know, not everyone agrees with that. So you might want to pause, might want to just quickly review those 4 objects on that slide. Could you identify the 4 causes of the following images? Now, as I say, human beings, when it comes to human beings, those things, the purpose of a human being that is a bit controversial. When we come to the universe itself, that's even more controversial and tricky and difficult for Aristotle to explain. Now, he does have an explanation for it: the material cause, the formal cause, the efficient cause, and the final cause of the universe. And it's something we're going to dig into now, particularly focusing on the efficient cause and the final cause, the maker, the outside force, the external agency of the universe, and the purpose to it. And for that, Aristotle explains is the prime mover, something called the prime mover. If everything within the universe has a final cause, a purpose, then so does the universe as a whole. This is Aristotle's logic. If the universe has a purpose, for Aristotle, the purpose of the universe is God. So just make sure you understand that. The purpose of the universe is God. As in, God is the purpose of the universe. But not the Judeo-Christian tradition, not the typical God that we might think of, the omnibenevolent, omnipotent, etc. God. God, in inverted commas, for Aristotle, is the prime mover. The prime mover. So what does that mean then? So the prime mover is the final cause, because Aristotle didn't believe in an infinite regress of cause and effect. Yes, he believed everything was in a kind of constant chain of cause and effect. These 4 causes coming into play all the time, turning one thing into another, changing its state of potentiality and actuality, becoming more complicated, less complicated, moving, constantly fluctuating. Animals creating new animals, humans creating new humans, etc. But he believed that chain of cause and effect couldn't go on forever. It doesn't go back and back and back. It's not infinite. There must have been something at the beginning, something that was unmoved, something that started the universe off, something that kind of caused those 4 causes to start having an effect. And so Aristotle created the concept of the prime mover, the first mover, the unmoved mover, which is at the very start, and causes this to take charge. And so it's the initial kind of push, the maker, the external force, the initial push of those dominoes of the universe. That's what the prime mover does. But also, he argues that the prime mover is a bit like a magnet, attracting things to it. That's why things are changing, because they are attracted kind of subconsciously within their nature to the prime mover. It's the object of many things is telos. And to kind of explain the prime mover in a bit more detail, he says it's got certain qualities. It's incorporeal, in other words, it's got no body. It's indivisible, doesn't split up. It's one simple entity. It doesn't take up any space, it doesn't change, it's perfect. And and eternal, and it's some kind of mechanical force. Okay, it's the great attractor. It thinks, if it does think, it doesn't think consciously, but if it does think, it thinks only of itself. It creates movement by exercising a pull on things, like a kind of subconscious pull on things, and that's why things move and things change. It's not a creator. It's not the same as saying God created the world, as it does in the opening line in Genesis. It's not the same thing as that. It's not conscious or deliberate. It doesn't act on purpose. It doesn't act with rational thought. It has no beginning. It's everlasting. And it's also referred to as the unmoved mover. So that's Aristotle's prime mover, kind of an explanation, the AO1 of Aristotle's prime mover. So we're going to look at AO2, evaluation of Aristotle's kind of key ideas and everything, and then zooming in on Aristotle's prime mover, evaluating that. Okay. So why does Aristotle's theories, why do they carry any strengths? What strengths do they carry? Well, they're accessible. They're based on sense experience, empirical evidence. We can see the chain of cause and effect. We can see in inanimate objects, in nature, in animals, in ourselves, these four causes taking effect. Yes, the final cause might be slightly controversial, but we can see it happen. We can see it with our senses. We can validate it. And we can put kind of almost anything into those four causes without any questions, without any doubt. And Aristotle is known as the father of science. His methods of investigation, they've been proven. They're part of our kind of concept of modern day science. Although we might come to slightly different conclusions, the ideas, the fundamental search for knowledge of things, the idea that everything is a constant state of motion or change or process is there in science. And, modern day ideas on evolution kind of backs that up as well, to say that actually evolution is in the constant state of change and flux and process. And then maybe there's a great attractor behind evolution, which is why things are constantly changing. But that's a kind of leap in philosophical thought. And the objections, some of which I've already kind of mentioned or alluded to, that everything has a purpose. Does it? Is this always the case? Is Aristotle guilty of the fallacy of composition, to say that just because individual things have a purpose, like a chair has a purpose, a table has a purpose, an acorn seed has a purpose, etc. Does that mean everything, the universe itself, the whole, has a purpose? Or is he making a philosophical jump in logic and maybe an error there, a fallacy of composition? And then does the human body, if we take that idea, and zoom it and apply it into the human body itself, does the human body kind of have a purpose, or is that more like our soul has a purpose? Does every part of our body have a purpose? And if so, does that perhaps prejudice or discriminate against some people? Does that say some people are unable to feel their purpose, perhaps because they're disabled, or maybe they've had an operation and have had a certain part of their body removed, and so therefore, they're kind of at a disadvantage here to trying to live that virtuous life of actuality. Other objections then. This idea of purpose. There are lots of the objections to Aristotle revolve around his claim of purpose. Are purposes innate? Is it true to say that human beings have an innate purpose? Or is it something we maybe place onto ourselves? David Hume talks about the idea that nature itself isn't ordered, it's that we place order onto nature, the same kind of idea. Our purpose is innate, or are we kind of putting purposes on ourselves as perhaps our quest for truth and our quest for fairness, and perhaps linking back to Plato, our quest for solidarity and permanence in such an ever-changing world? Aristotle perhaps describes the efficient cause, doesn't really explain it. they seem very vague and broad, and perhaps rely on more recent science to either back him up or contradict him. Bertrand Russell argues that the universe just exists. There's no reason or need for a cause for the universe. It just is. And although earlier we were saying maybe there is a link between Aristotle and Charles Darwin's theory of evolution, we could perhaps make a link. On the very surface of things, there isn't one, and they do oppose each other, because Charles Darwin's theory of evolution says that the universe just exists. There's no divine or innate purpose to it. Similar to humans, there's no divine or innate purpose to humans. They are just a product of millions and millions of years of change and process. There's no higher thinking. There's no kind of greater plan. There's no soul. There's no eternal elements. There's no ultimate goodness or beauty or truth or justice to it. So again, Aristotle's prime mover, just to recap what Aristotle's prime mover is, and now a quick evaluation of that. So strengths. It kind of coincides with the Judeo-Christian belief that God is eternal and omnipotent. We've come across Aquinas. We come across Aquinas in the Arguments for God chapter, the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, his analogy of the archer, his 5 arguments for God, and we look at 3 of them in the cosmological argument. And they're all taken from Aristotle's idea of this unchanging, unmoved, eternal, prime kind of mover, the first domino in the dominoes of the universe. If God is not involved in humanity, which the prime mover isn't, the prime mover is not all-loving, the prime mover is not interested in humanity, then that kind of explains the existence of evil and suffering. It kind of explains the inconsistent triad. Maybe that's a good thing. Supports the theory that God, some kind of divinity, some kind of deity, some kind of greater power exists, which other religions can borrow from and build on. And it provides a solution to the question of the conundrum of the infinite regress. On the negative side, on the objections, for religious people, raises lots of questions. If Aristotle's concepts of the prime mover are true, what is the point in prayer? If the prime mover is distant, it's not all loving, it's not interested in humanity, it's not personal, what is the point of prayer? What is the point in worshipping this kind of God at all, if it cannot listen, hear, or respond to human beings in that way, in any way? Why do lots of people have religious experiences? If God is more like the prime mover, then religious experiences surely should be explained with natural explanations, with naturalistic explanations, like Feuerbach or Freud or wish fulfillment, that kind of idea. If the prime mover is the deity out there, the unmoved mover, the uncaused causer, if that is the one out there, where does that leave questions of morality? Should we look to God for morality? Perhaps not, if that is the God that is out there. Does it offer hope? Part of religious ideas is the idea of hope and comfort in such a world of suffering, that there is an afterlife, there is a heaven, there is kind of an end to it all. There is a happy ending. Does it offer that? Perhaps not. Perhaps religious people are kind of left in the dark, as is everybody else. Aristotle didn't believe that the soul, he believed in a human soul, but he didn't believe it was eternal. He didn't believe it lived on after death. Plato believed there was a human soul that returned to the realm of the forms after death. Aristotle didn't. And for religious people, perhaps that kind of doesn't really offer that hope, that comfort. And then some other objections then. Some that we've already covered, some that are perhaps that are new. So the top one, really, this is a philosophical objection. It's quite a clever one. If you can get it into an essay, it's really good. As we said before, Aristotle was an empiricist. He took his theories of everything on what he could observe. He observed the changes, the four causes, and he built his theory of everything around that. And that was his explanation for why everything is in a constant state of change. And yet, when he gets to the prime mover, the conclusion of which, his conclusion that there is a prime mover, that's kind of into the realm of rational thought. It's pure thought, and it's pure reason. There's no empirical evidence for the prime mover. It seems like he suddenly jumped from being an empiricist to being a rationalist just to kind of find his conclusion to the conundrum which he's drawn himself into with his empiricist ideas. And so if it cannot be observed empirically, does that kind of nullify his conclusion? Because he's an empiricist. If he's basing everything else on empiricism, then surely a rational conclusion does not fit. It's illogical. And that maybe he falls down there. But although we said earlier that maybe other religious people could build on, like Thomas Aquinas did, they build on Aristotle's ideas on the prime mover, it doesn't prove, the Judeo-Christian God or even gods in other religions exist. It simply suggests something started the universe. Perhaps it's more anti-religion than pro-religion, in fact. Is there a need for a prime mover? If there is a theory of evolution, if that is the way things started, is there a need for the prime mover? Or maybe there's a way of getting them both into one theory. Again, so continuity in Aristotle's thought. If everything is a constant state of change and the four causes apply to everything, why is the prime mover exempt from that? Why has he suddenly come up with an exception to his own theory of everything? Again, does his logic, does his philosophy, does his argument fall down here? The inconsistency in what he says. Again, why does there just have to be one prime mover? When we come across David Hume later, when he critiques Aquinas's, built on Aristotle's Aquinas's cosmological argument, David Hume raises the question, well, why is there just one designer? Why is there just one unmoved mover? Why couldn't there be multiple? And so we could say the same thing. Why couldn't there be multiple prime movers? Why does Aristotle conclude that there's one? And as I was saying this earlier, that perhaps the prime mover is anti-religion, because for religious people, God, belief in God, particularly for Christians, God is immanent. God is deeply and intimately revolved on life on earth. The belief in Jesus, God incarnate in the flesh with humans, walking and talking with human beings. The concepts of salvation stems from that in Christianity, that God came in the flesh and spent time with humans and wants to spend time, eternity with humans in the flesh. That whole kind of way of thinking doesn't apply to the prime mover. The prime mover is impersonal. It doesn't do any of that. So perhaps there's no concept of salvation. All those religious ideas perhaps go out the window. And is it even then worth respecting or revering the prime mover? And perhaps as another thought, more of the wider context in which Aristotle believed. And we go back to Socrates, when Socrates was originally questioning the pantheon, the belief in the Greek gods and the goddesses. And if you know anything about the Greek gods and the goddesses, they were people, human beings in that realm, in that world, were at the whims and the wishes of the gods. There wasn't this kind of personal relationship between people and Zeus and Hades and Hermes and all those other ones. People were at the whims of them. If the gods didn't feel like sending rain, they didn't send rain. If people wanted the gods to send rain, they would do all these sacrifices and rituals in the temple to get rain to come to their land, because otherwise, that perhaps wouldn't happen. They would have to convince the gods to do something to help humans. And if the gods got angry with each other for some affair or some kind of soap opera style drama, they would lash out, and the negative impact would land on human beings, and there would be a flood, or there would be an earthquake, or something like that. People were at the whims of impersonal, distant gods. So maybe the prime mover is a little bit more like the impersonal, distant, uninterested gods of the Greek pantheon than the Abrahamic God of the Bible. So maybe, if you wanted to draw comparisons, maybe Aristotle is perhaps building on his Greek heritage rather than perhaps making any inadvertent links to the kind of God of the Bible, which comes a bit later in chronologically. Anyway, so there we are. Kind of a bit of run through Plato and Aristotle, covered all the A1, and quite a lot of evaluation there. Obviously, there's a lot more we could bring out of Plato and Aristotle, but this is plenty for you guys to get on with. And there's a lot more wider reading you could do. We could link to Augustine. We could link to other pre-Socratic thinkers. We could offer a lot more objections. But there we go, guys. There we go.